Hey everybody, Mike O'Brien. I'm super excited today. We have Chief Freeman with us, who has a awesome background in the fire service, from private sector and the military all the way to a 3,000-mile job change, which I've always wondered what makes you go from one coast to the other. But Chief is always smiling if you've seen him around. He is so active, I think, in the fire service, from education, training, NFPA board of directors, and he is not a person that is afraid to jump in, because if it looks right to me, moves to California and you are already engaged in the California Fire Chiefs Association. So, Chief, thanks for being with us. Our goal is always to just try to inspire, motivate, maybe share some of the lessons we've learned as chiefs, as leaders, to this upcoming group that's behind us. So welcome, and tell us about this move from one coast to the other. What took you out west?
Well, thank you so much, Michael, and it's truly an honor to be with you on your show. Leaving Hartford, it was hard. It was hard. I was the fire chief, emergency management director, sworn in as a 37th chief at 37 years old. I was there for a little over 5 years, and I had phenomenal firefighters and a phenomenal community. And it was difficult, but when the opportunity arose and I was contacted by the city of Oakland to come join the Oakland family and the OFD family, I certainly couldn't pass that opportunity up. And what's been remarkable has been the embracement from the boots on the ground and the community in general. So it's been great.
Yeah, Oakland, what, 20 some stations, 25 stations?
25 stations, 72 square miles, 19.1 of those miles is on waterway. We have the third busiest port in the state and the fifth busiest port in the country. So never a dull moment in the city of Oakland.
I bet. So if my memory serves me correct, are your firefighters on a 48-hour schedule?
4896.
Okay, so talk to me about that, because for me, right, my staff's on a 24. They get overtime, and there's always discussion about 48. So what was your experience going over there? I mean, obviously they've got some experience with this.
So Michael, one thing I realized quickly, as I've traveled the country and been a fire chief now for the last 15 years, is that I got the short end of the stick when I first got on the job 21 years ago. I was working at 24/48, right? Go from a 24/48 as a firefighter EMT in Mississippi to, in between Iraq and Lockheed Martin in the private sector, go to Hartford. They're working 1 day on, 3 days off, and then come to Oakland, 4896. I'm like, my goodness, you all have it made. But the firefighters love it. They absolutely love the 4896, and even in Hartford, when they were working 1 day on, 3 days off, they absolutely love the schedule. And it's for us, unfortunately, we are struggling with being understaffed. So I have 539 funded positions, 420 actual boots and seats, but because of workers' comp and transitional duty, actually 350 able-bodied firefighters able to come to work and do the job. So we have what we call mandos here. That's going crazy. Mandatory overtime. We have firefighters working 5, 6, 7, 8 days straight. Immediately, that was priority number one. Walking in the door is to correct that mandatory overtime crisis. Thankfully, we have a great city administrator who has partnered with me to authorize a hiring of about 100 firefighters. So we have 20 that's in the tower right now. We have another firefighter paramedic lateral class that's going to start on February 28th. Then we're going to have another firefighter lateral class that's going to start June 1st. And then we're going to see what the numbers are at the conclusion of the third class before we start our fourth by the end of the year. So the firefighters are hurting right now, but help is on the way.
It's amazing. Through COVID, our staff have done some amazing things and working tremendous hours in serving our citizen. I think you nailed it with we want to support our firefighters, get them the resources, get them partners and peers, and because so much overtime wears quick.
That's right. Absolutely.
All right, so let's go back in life. I think we all get into the fire service different ways. So tell me about growing up. What were you in high school? Were you a good student? Did you play sports? Let's go before the fire service. Who were you?
So great question, man. So number one, starting off with being studious, absolutely not. I was your typical jock that only cared about sports, only cared about hanging out with friends. I graduated high school with a 2.5 GPA, but to my defense, I never studied and never did homework. So my GPA suffered because of it. And our parents, our teachers always tell us that we have to take school seriously in one ear and out the other. I remember my algebra teacher, Miss Cagney, saying, son, you better pay attention because you're going to use algebra one day. And I said, ma'am, I will never use algebra. So get promoted to engineer. What do you use in every single day? Algebra, right? So, but at least I was man enough to go back to her and I found her and told her she was absolutely right. And that made her day. I could still hear her laugh as I had that vision. But father, he was in the military. So my father, he was a career NCO, non-commissioned officer for the Air Force. We moved around every several years. He was actually from Mississippi, Indianola to be exact. No one's ever heard of Indianola, but everyone's heard of BB King. So Indianola is where BB King was born.
Okay.
And he retired in 96. So in 96, that was my junior year in high school. We moved to Biloxi, Mississippi, which is the Gulf Coast. And that's where I met my wife, junior year in high school. And she helped me out a little bit, tried to do my homework for me, but she did such a great job. I decided to marry her. And now we have two beautiful kids, Harmony and Joy. Harmony's going on 10 and Joy's going on 5. But yeah, definitely was an athlete, passionate about sports. I was an All-American high school track and field athlete. You can't tell that today, 60 pounds, 70 pounds later, but did anchored the 4x4 relay and ran the half mile, 800 meters. And ironically enough, that's how I got into the fire service. I got hurt freshman year, and the alumni got me a job at the casino. Casino got me in touch with several folks in the community who at the time advised me that the city was looking to hire firefighters and I'd be a great firefighter. So I applied, went through the process, finished out number one on the written exam, number one on physical agility, and the rest is history, as they say.
Wow. So firefighting wasn't necessarily on your radar.
No, I got plenty of mentors and friends that have the cool story that the fire apparatus drove by their house, or there was a structure fire at 3 or 4 or 5, and they knew that's what they wanted to be in the fire service. That wasn't my story. Funny enough, I wanted to be a DEA agent or a U.S. Marshal, to lock up drug dealers and criminals, just like many other families, drugs had negatively impacted my family. And so I wanted to be a DEA agent originally as a kid. But, the moment that I started researching the fire service, from the time it was even mentioned to me, and the day that I walked through the doors at the academy for the first time, I knew then this is what I was born to do. This is what I will do as long as I'm on this earth. So I've loved every single second of being a firefighter.
All right, so let's talk about your academy. So everybody has a different academy. You loved it. What was the flow of basically they assigned you to the academy for X period of time, work on your firefighter?
That's right. So it was the Mississippi State Fire Academy, very disciplined, very structured, and that foundation of structure, organization, and discipline, which I talk about to this day, was established in the Mississippi State Fire Academy. It was class number 67, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
Smoke dogger class 62, and car certified advanced rescue specialist class number 8. But that experience at the academy with the instructors that we had was absolutely phenomenal. I remember John Craig, Pat Terrell, those guys were just awesome. DB Burns. It was some legendary instructors at the academy that had stellar reputations in the fire service in Mississippi.
All right. So for me, I mean, there's no doubt academy, fire service made sense, right? Educationally, it was probably the first time coming out of high school that I was pre-reading. And did you find changes in your academic behaviors when you got into the academy?
Most certainly. And you know what, Michael? It was ironically enough, I didn't quite know it prior to getting to the academy, but later on in life, I was diagnosed with being dyslexic. So my first 3 weeks of the academy, I was failing. And, I still remember going to instructor Terrell saying, Chief, I'm struggling. I'm reading every single page. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And he stopped me and said, well, Reggie, that's what you're doing wrong. You're reading every single page, reading every single page. Did anyone ever teach you how to study? I'm like, no, sir. so, he sat down, took the time and really taught me how to study. And that changed from actually that moment, not just with the academy, but with my life. It gave me a different perspective on academics and training and education because now I wasn't intimidated by it. I understood it. I understood myself a lot more after he took the time to sit down with me and have that conversation. So long story short, by the end of the academy, graduated with the second highest average in the academy, just because he taught me how to study. And so that is something that I'll never forget, and something that I always try to tell any and everyone that will listen. The problem that you may have, you may feel like it's out of your control, but in a lot of instances, the solution may be right there in front of you. You just have to have conversations with people that care just as much as you do. Because Pat, he cared just as much about my future and my position as I did.
I think it's easy for our training staff to forget that, right? Sometimes we get so focused on the task of fire suppression and rescue and paramedic programs, right? And it's easy to say, look, this kid's not getting it, or this, whatever it might be. And it's so, sometimes we forget we can change a life, and not just from the fire service perspective, but a human being, right? When we dive into that.
That's right. Absolutely. And, and after that, getting that confidence and knowing that, in the fire service, I took a very, I took a very untraditional path to get to where I'm at. And I'm pretty sure we'll talk about that here in a moment. But I just looked at academics differently. And so after I graduated, I got my bachelor's degree in leadership, finished that with a 3.2 GPA. And then my master's degree later on, back in 2007, or I believe it was, or 2008, got my master's in executive fire service leadership, finished that with a 4.0. And then that gave me enough confidence to pursue my PhD, which I wish it did not, because that has been challenging. That's been the hardest thing I've ever done before in my life. But knock on wood, I'll be Dr. Freeman literally in 2 months after I defend. But just that one moment at the academy changed the trajectory of my professional career. Just because there were certain elementary elements that I was unaware of, not only about myself, but also about studying and applying yourself. So very grateful for that.
So, when we hear a lot from within the fire service, sometimes I think we're our own worst enemy. You don't need a bachelor's degree, or only if you're chief, you need a degree. And here you are, you're going to be at the top. So, when you have, we have a lot of aspiring fire chiefs or command staff, let's just say. And sometimes I run into this conversation. I might be teaching somewhere and they say, hey, we don't need degrees. This is a blue collar profession. And there are times I agree that fighting fire is a very blue collar, cold, dark, wet, but the thinking capacity, the mindset, the troubleshooting that we require, I see it translating to degrees. And it's hard to get a 25 or a 30-year-old who's got 2 kids to go back to school because you want them to be successful. When you hear stuff like that, where do you go? What advice do you typically give back?
That's a great question, Michael. And early in my career, in Mississippi, people always told me what I couldn't do, what I shouldn't do. And, I put myself through rope rescue tech, hazmat tech, confined space rescue tech, vehicle machinery extrication tech. I put myself through all those classes, right? And there was a lot of, I guess you could say, conversations I had with my brothers in the firehouse to where, they would really try to talk me out of pursuing those classes, saying, "Hey, what do you need that for? You're not going to get promoted anyway. You only got 5 years on the job. Why don't you focus on being the best firefighter you could be instead of getting these pieces of paper?" And my response was, "Well, I am trying to. That's exactly why I'm, trying to get these pieces of paper, not because I want something to frame to put on the wall. I don't need that, but I just want to be the most informed and well trained as possible. So when those tones go off, there's not one incident or scenario that I will not be able to respond to as a professional firefighter." And as it pertained to doing the job, I took pride in being a dog. There was not one firefighter that was in the house or on the fire ground that was going to outwork me or be more competent. So, that same foundation of competency, passion, dedication, hard work, and work ethic that I had as a firefighter, all as though it was brief as we talk in terms of our profession and what a fire chief or fire officer should look like as far as tenure. I took pride in being competent and took pride in knowing that I can handle my own and also carry my brothers and sisters if necessary, if they needed help. So, for those that are being told, hey, pieces of paper, degrees, certs don't put out fire. I mean, okay, if it makes you feel good for those words to come out of your mouth, okay, cool. But at the same time, as someone who takes pride in being an alpha, I appreciate what you're saying, but your perspective is not going to dictate, my pursuits. And I always tell everyone, control your own destiny. And a lot of times, most of the people who really talk down and negatively on degrees, education, certs, or those who don't have it, can't get it or don't want to get it. So at the end of the day, I respect your opinion, but I'm not going to let your opinion dictate what actions I take because you don't have it. So at the end of the day, I want to be a well-rounded executive fire officer. And in order to be that, and when I look at the definition of competency as I talk to folks across the country on this topic, when you think about competency, it's defined as training, education, and experience, but more importantly, the application of training, education, and experience. There's a time in the fire service to where tenure was equivalent to competency. Mm. And I know a bunch of guys that have 20 plus years on the job that are garbage. So, you can't sit there and tell me that just because you have X amount of years on the job, you're competent, you know what you're doing. It's not the case. So every single firefighter should be looked at from a unique perspective for what they bring to the table, their training, education, and experience, but more importantly, how they apply that training, education, and experience. And I am a firm believer that experience cannot be replaced. However, it could and can be supported by training and education.
That work ethic had to come from somewhere. I'm curious, but when I look at fire does not fight us fair. And I want every tactical advantage against it. And because it's fighting a fight that doesn't give one thing about us, it doesn't care about our crew integrity, it doesn't care. And, a lot of times with training and experience and education, I want to control what I can control, right? And if me getting better as a chief or as a company officer and solving problems quickly, or my logic, right, that's only going to help my crews. That's what I hope, right? And so tell me, did this work ethic come from your mom, your dad? Do you think you had a captain that you mirrored, or where do you think it came from?
Came from my father. And, something I mentioned earlier with drugs negatively impacting my family. Mother had a drug addiction. Long story short, cleaned out the bank account. Father at the time was in the Air Force. So I can still recall him going to the Air Force, doing his job, going to the base, working, doing his job, getting off work. And there's times where he was washing cars at the car dealership. Another time he was working as a cashier at the cage at a casino. And, the man literally slept maybe 5 hours a day, just to take care of me and my brothers. So I saw this at a younger age, and not one time did the man complain. He had the physical look of exhaustion, but not one time did he ever complain or say, "Poor me." He did what he had to do to take care of his family. So seeing that example at a young age, it was ironically enough how it worked out when I got married at a very young age. When I first got into the fire service, my salary at the fire department, working 24.48 in Mississippi, was $19,500 a year. And my wife, because she is very studious, she went straight from high school through college and got her MBA from University of Texas. So we had student loan debt on my 19.5 year salary. She was a teller at the bank, making $8 an hour. So we were just, money was tight. We weren't going to make it just off fire department salary. So I was working 4 jobs. I was cutting grass on my days off. I was teaching at the State Fire Academy, and I was stocking groceries at the grocery store. And following the example of my father, never once complained. And I remember my wife, I came home one day, middle of the summer, after cutting grass with my buddy that I worked with on the job, who had a landscaping company. And I came walking through the door, just exhausted, beat. Wife had tears in her eyes and said, "Please let me get a second job so you don't have to work so much." And I remember distinctly telling her, "Sweetheart, I'll work 6 jobs before you work 2. Because I really just found it as my duty as her husband to take care of her, to take care of the household." So definitely get it from my father. He was no stranger to hard work. And I remember him telling me stories being in Indianola. My great-grandfather, my grandfather and great-grandfathers, they were sharecroppers. So my dad, before school, had to go out into the cotton fields with his dad and tend to the fields before school. So just hearing those stories, how can you not give 100%, roll your sleeves up, and have a good work ethic?
Love it. Do you think your daughters will follow?
I hope so, right? As any parent, you would hope that you give your children the attention, guidance, and support that they need to make intelligent and good decisions. And I start them off the same way my dad started me off. You get up in the morning, first thing you do, if you're not in the bathroom, brushing your teeth or using the restroom, you're making your bed. So that's our rule. That at going on 5 and going on 10, that they both have as kids in our house, is they make their bed before they do anything else. They make their bed. And so I explained to my daughter, my oldest daughter, I said, "Sweetheart, we'll have a conversation when you get a little bit older, and you can understand why Daddy makes you make your bed first thing in the morning." So I would hope so. We're trying to instill those values, and even with community work, my oldest loves going with me to community events throughout the city, whether it be after school or on weekends. She loves it. Loves it even more when the cameras around, news cameras around. I get interviewed, so she's always there with pops. But yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing how they flourish and grow up.
I have 2 daughters myself, and I think that some of us are blessed with two girls, and it's a big responsibility, maybe at times more than being a fire chief, because to be the daughter the daughter of a fire chief probably has its own pressures. But I think that's a big thing in my life is, man, those kids. I hope I'm giving them the tools to be successful. Well, for time, and my oldest is graduating this year, and so right here it comes to see if we did our job as parents as they kind of go out. And I think only the lucky ones get 2 daughters.
That's right.
So what made you go, man, I want to be a fire chief? Because you teach a lot, and I'm sure you've asked a room, who in this room wants to be fire chief? And there are times I find one or two hands in a room of 50 go up of budding leaders. And there's times people don't want to be fire chief. And I think we all hit this for some reason. So when did you hit it? Why did you want to become a fire chief? What was that driving factor?
Michael, for me, it was the experiences I had when I first got on the job in Mississippi. So my 21-year anniversary is actually in 17 more days. So February 19th, 2001 is when I first got on the job. And, being the only African-American firefighter, there's a lot of that experience, hearing the N word, being called the N word, having a noose in my locker, broken glass in my bunk boots. I went through pure hell. And, it was challenging for me because, Reggie Freeman wanted to go one direction, but firefighter Freeman knew that, I had to remain professional. So that really, the way I describe it today, it was a nuclear implosion that I utilized all that energy to, again, number one, make sure that I was being the best firefighter EMT I could possibly be, but then also looking at what I need to do to be successful in the future. And early on, I really didn't have any ambitions to be the fire chief. I just really had a lot of disdain and disappointment in my fire chief for him not doing the right thing, not exercising leadership, but just not being an ethical leader, period. And it just works out to where the path that that I was given, because I did put myself through a bunch of training classes, and I did start pursuing, my higher education. Just so happens things started falling in my lap. And I remember there was a point in time to where I literally, having that personal conversation with God and said, why me? I was in Iraq. I was a chief in Iraq as a civilian fire chief working for the government at 25, 26 years old. I never thought in a million years I'd be in that position. And so then I realized, after accepting my blessings, right, I just really focused on being the best chief I could possibly be. And that comes from a place of humility. I knew there's a lot that I didn't know. Absolutely, there's a lot that I did not know. And so you're honest with the men and women that you work with. You lean on them, ask, hey, what do you think? And it's not an environment to where you make collective decisions, because at the end of the day, someone has to lead. But you're also not sticking your chest out and tapping your badge and saying, you're going to do this because I said so. And if you want to have a work environment that is unproductive, just do that. Just tap your badge and see how well that works out for you. So I just learned at a very young age to where leadership is about serving others, and leadership is about influencing and inspiring those around you to be the best they can possibly be because you believe in them. And early on in my career, I really had to lean on the rest of the team, just because I knew, coming from a humble place, I knew that there was a lot that I didn't know. So I was going to make sure that I got it right first time around as often as possible.
You bring up something that is probably foreign to me, and I'd be naive or stick my head in the sand, but I'm sure we have a lot of African American young men and women that are fighting those battles still today.
No doubt a doubt.
And God, I hope to God it's not happening in my firehouses, and it could be, but I really hope it's not. And I hope we got the right leaders in the right places to make sure stuff isn't happening. What would you say to a fire chief, looking at your career? Because what you described, I mean, I had water in my boots as a probie, but dear God, that doesn't even compare to what you just described. What would you say to us as fire chiefs in this issue? Because, right, I if somebody asks me, I'm going to say, look, we have zero tolerance. We have this, we have that. And I think as fire chiefs, we always worry what is happening in our buildings when we're not there. You have 25 buildings going on. We empower these bosses. So what advice would you give to fire chiefs, on this? Because that's a heavy, big thing.
It is, and and that in essence is what we signed up for, right? If it was easy, anyone would be able to do it. But the reality is, we are a chosen few, and so compromising ethics, morality, honor, integrity, we don't have that luxury. And if it ever is compromised, we should be relieved of duty, or we should have the courage to resign and put our badge on the table and walk away. And that's really where I come from because of the experience I had. When we talk about zero tolerance, as you just stated, that is real to me. There's no way in the world I'm going to have a member of my organization who raised their right hand and took an oath of office to uphold service and honor to our community and to one another, and them go back on that oath without there being repercussions. That will not happen on my watch, regardless of someone's sexual orientation, their gender, whatever religious denomination they practice or embrace, you name it. There is absolutely zero tolerance for any form of discrimination, bias, or harassment. And we fail as chiefs, and we forget that there should be boundaries established, because unfortunately some folks, everyone in Oakland Fire Department, even Hartford, they know I smoke 3 cigars a day. And a lot of times when I go see the troops, we're outside, out back, and I have what I call chief chats, and we're smoking cigars. But no matter how fond I may be of you, how much I may respect you, doesn't matter how many cigars we smoke with one another, if you violate city department policy, you will be held accountable. And not having those boundaries and things that are said in private not coming to light. I think a lot of chiefs think just because they are made aware of something privately that it's not going to, quote, get out. That's a common mistake that chiefs make. But at the end of the day, if you uphold your oath of office as a chief, doesn't matter how you're advised, whether it be privately, in text, phone call, email, doesn't matter. If you do the right thing, everything else takes care of itself. And it's too easy to do the right thing. But unfortunately, some of us as chiefs, we have to think about it. And that's a shame. Mm-hmm. And, you mentioned something that was interesting in regards to, you would hope that it's not happening in our departments. And I just had a recent conversation with a good friend of mine who's a fire chief here in Northern California. He's actually Latino, but he looks Caucasian. And he's told me, he said, Reggie, you'd be amazed with some of the stuff that, these chiefs say, when we're at conferences, because they think that I'm Caucasian, but they're speaking negatively about the Latin community or Latinos or Latinas. They're saying these things. I can't believe it. I can't believe it. They don't know that I'm actually Spanish because I look Caucasian. And so that stuff happens, and it's just not okay if you are African American and there's African American, Spanish representation in the firehouse kitchen, and someone is speaking ill or saying something negative about Asians. It's not okay to laugh at that joke. It's not okay. Yeah. Because again, that is a form of harassment, discrimination, and bias. And so it doesn't matter if they're not talking about you. They may not be talking about you at that very moment, but who's to say when you're not in the room that you're going to be the topic of discussion, or someone who looks like you would be the topic of discussion. And so just having those principles and values that comes from the top and cascades down through the battalions and the companies is so very important. You cannot pick and choose which rules you want to abide by within the organization. All must be upheld at all times by all members.
I, I appreciate you talking through that, and I think you hit a hot topic, right? Okay, so let me just paint a picture, and you tell me if I get this wrong, but you're this young fire chief in Iraq, you're working in the private sector, you've got this experience, this education building up, and you decide to leave to go to a city. And I'm assuming, right, we always ask people, oh, okay, what are you going to do your first 3 months? I'm sure you went and observed, you went and toured, you met with your command staff. But at some point, the chief says, this is my values. I'm assuming. So you say you use cigars. Tell me what it's like when you went to the city in Hartford there and you started. How was that transition from this private sector, young fire chief, relatively young still, in a pretty good metro population style? Tell me about coming into that arena and how you set values, priorities.
So I laugh because it's funny thinking back on it, right? Because you're like, man, how in the world did I make it through that? But one thing that I loved about Hartford is, Hartford is a blue collar town, just like Oakland, but blue collar town, and the firefighters absolutely know what they're doing. And there was no other department, even in the state, that resembled Hartford. You weren't going to go in, or you can't go in and BS the firefighters in Hartford. So I focused on just being myself. I am that guy who has a lot of energy, who doesn't mind saying what's on my mind, doesn't mind saying anything that comes to mind. But at the end of the day, the firefighters knew that I had their best interests at heart. They knew that I was going to go to bat for them and make sure they had all the tools and resources they needed to do their job. And so I just walked in the door with the mindset that I was going to support them. And 2 years prior to me getting there, it was October 7th, 2014, Kevin Lamont Bell, he passed away in the line of duty. It was the first department line of duty death in 40 years. Kevin was born and raised in Hartford and loved in the community in the North End where he was from. And it was hard, very, very hard for the city and the department. And even up to the time I left, firefighters still weren't over Kevin's passing, nor should they be. And I don't think they ever will be. But, making sure that would not happen again, that we would not lose another firefighter because we weren't doing what we're supposed to do at admin, and setting that tone, getting FaceTime with the firefighters. I was always in the firehouse, first 4 days on the 4 shifts. I was there, met with all the firefighters, all 17 companies. And it was long days, long, hard days, but it was well worth it when it was said and done, because I wanted to set that tone that I care about what you have to say, and we're in this together. So I'm going to tell you what my expectations are of you, but at the same time, I want you to tell me what your expectations are of me. And those first 4 days setting that tone, I think, was instrumental in establishing that relationship as we discuss, boundaries, and me setting the tone of leadership. And I never felt like I was being contested by any member of the organization, because they knew what my leadership style was. I am no nonsense. I'm personable, I'm approachable, but at the same time, I'm no nonsense. And I think respect begets respect, and they knew that they had my respect.
All right, so you've probably promoted 100 company officers somewhere in your career at this point. I think our company officers have the hardest job, right? They've got the pressure from the top, they get the staff from the bottom. Obviously, there's a lot going on at that level. So what do you tell incoming company officers to be successful? I'm sure you have a fire chief speech or a discussion. What is it that your advice when that ready to go brand new company officer, what are you telling them?
Never hesitate to do the right thing. And company officers are the most critical personnel in a firehouse, the firefighter is the most important. But the company officer is the most critical because they have legitimate authority from the office of the chief, but they're on the piece in the firehouse with the men and women and non-binary members who actually get the job done. And, for me, it's very, very important to always have that connection with company officers. Just yesterday, I had a Zoom video conference call with everyone that's been promoted within the last year from the rank of engineer up to battalion chief, just to we have systematic follow-ups to where, we always, I think, make the mistake in the fire service of promoting folks just off a written exam or a chief's interview. But we never ensure that folks are properly prepared prior to promotion. And even worse, after we give them their badge, we never even have follow-up discussions to say, hey, how's it going? Is there anything I can do to help you? And what do you need from me to be successful? And so the conversation yesterday was to ask those questions formally, to where, they're amongst their peers. I set the stage as, hey, none of us are born knowing exactly what to do, especially as we're promoted. There's not one person that didn't have questions or may have struggled. And I raised my hand and said, including me. So this forum is for us to have a discussion about things that are important to you and your new roles. And we just make that the norm here. So first thing I tell them is never hesitate to do the right thing. Set boundaries, communicate expectations, and know that you have a duty to explain. So in today's fire service, when I first got on the job 20 years ago, you didn't ask questions, right? Whether it was a company officer or even a senior firefighter. If you were a probie or the new guy or new gal on the job, you did as you were told. You didn't ask questions. Well, it's different today. And with 4 different generations in the workplace, I tell the company officers, you have a duty to explain, but you do not have a duty to debate. But take the time to explain why we're doing the things that we're doing. It's only going to make your life easier as a company officer because, Reggie, that's from Gen Z, is going to keep asking you anyway. Why? And so just to show that the member is valued and, you demonstrating that by taking the time to explain processes, you're also negating unnecessary conflict because that individual, will become pessimistic and not have faith or confidence in leadership because they feel as if they're being bullied into doing things and their voice doesn't matter, et cetera. So you can stop that from happening by explaining why. But you have a duty to explain, not a duty to debate. So those are really the top few things I tell company officers when they're made.
I think that has to be one of the best explanations I've ever heard, that duty to explain, not to debate, right? And we see that so many times where our company officers get pressed. And I think you even phrased it when I asked you about Connecticut and that chief job, right? You're sitting there, all these things are starting to flash of how we would handle things different, right? You are a much different fire chief today after 10 months in Oakland. You were a different fire chief 3 years ago. I think of all the things that I would have done different and the things I've met up as a fire chief over time. So how do you seem to be a very real and humble person with your staff. Do you ever find, how do you encourage, I find value with our staff when I'm real, when I say, hey, look, I don't know how to explain this to you, but I'm frustrated with whatever just happened. Let's work this together. Or I find a lot of value when I'm just a real guy who makes mistakes too, who's really trying to be the best. How do you help other officers get there? Because when I was a first company officer, I was wound tight. And when I was probably the first fire chief, I was different than I am today. So how do you help them?
Just to keep it simple, Michael, I share my failures with them. I'm 43 years old, but I'm a seasoned fire chief. I'm at the mountaintop. So my job is to get as many other people to the mountaintop as possible, because this this is my dream come true to be the fire chief of the city of Oakland. And so my job as a coach, mentor, support to help others accomplish their goals. And, when I think about it from that perspective, it's easy for me to share with them the things that's worked well for me, things that did not work so well that I thought I had it all planned out. And then boom, ran into a brick wall or an obstacle that took some time, or I had to solicit some help to address. So, and I also tell them, don't be afraid to say, I don't know, and I'm sorry. I do that quite frequently, whether it be a staff meeting, and my chief financial officer at our staff meeting a few weeks ago, as I led off. This was actually, I think, the second week of January is when we had our first staff meeting for 2022. So instead of going through our project taskers and our typical staff meeting, going through all the different projects that we have going on, I decided just to talk about, how things are going and what is it that I can do differently to help them be successful. And one thing my CFO brought up, who's of course in charge of not only our finances, but also HR, is, well, Chief, I know there's a lot of people working on bringing in, new recruits. There's a lot of moving parts of that, but sometimes I think people may assume that I'm made aware of us pursuing another class because someone in HR may let me know, but oftentimes I am not. So that can be problematic. So one recommendation I have is, maybe I can be included early on in conversations pertaining to new recruit classes. And I say, hey, you know what? You're absolutely right. I apologize. Now, was that something that I directly controlled as the fire chief? Absolutely not. There's, probably 2-3 different levels below me that could have sent that email. But as the chief of the department, good, bad, or indifferent, the buck stops with me. So, I immediately apologize and say, we will certainly do that. You have every right and necessity to be involved in the process. And that's not the first time, but just telling them it's okay to say, I don't know, and I'm sorry, will be very helpful to them with any challenges that they may have.
Yeah, I would say that's a great example. One of the things that I think is a big change for me now from when I was first appointed fire chief is I will say I'm sorry much faster. And what I mean by that is if I'm feeling tension from something, maybe I was a little firm in a meeting, maybe somebody hit a mark and I just didn't relay chiefly enough. I find that as soon as that meeting's over, hey, can you hold over for a second? Or, if it's later, even an hour later in the day, I will go find those people and say, hey, listen, I'm feeling a little off. I have to apologize. I think I was a little firm and it's not, and so I think I address things faster, realizing A, life is short. But B, I have so many good people. I don't want to come off that way to my staff and our firefighters. Their job is stressful enough. And fire chiefs can have weird days, weird hours, weird minutes. And if I feel that I did that, I will lean into it and I had to force myself there because it wasn't something that came easy to me. But if I feel something's off, especially with my high performers, the DEPs and fire marshal and HR director, I just try to lean into there and get into them real quick.
And Michael, you made me think of something also I would share with them is get the facts before you react.
Oh.
As a young chief, there's times to where, when we think about do-overs we wish we could have, most of my do-overs was me being too quick to react or respond to something instead of, taking my time, getting the facts, getting as much information as I could before responding or reacting to a situation or a person. So, and to this day, I have to practice that skill to this day, but get the facts before you react.
Yeah. All right. So we're going to transition. I got a couple questions and we're going to wrap this thing up. So you are involved outside of your organization. I think your love for the fire service shines through. Center for Public Safety Excellence, which is, I think, helping us transform the fire service. You're a sitting board member with NFPA. These are things that probably put extra hours on your day. So tell me why it's important to you to be engaged at that level?
Just to have the opportunity to contribute to the fire service, to me is just truly humbling and remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
And those opportunities, as they have come about, to be contacted to sit on boards and commissions, it's something I remember when I first got on the commission on professional credentialing with the Center for Public Safety Excellence. I was in Iraq still, and I believe I was 28, 29 years old. Came on as the first African American commissioner or person of color to be on the commission for CPC in my late 20s, right? So would have never expected to get that phone call, but to be able to have a seat at the table and to voice my input on things I think that will help the collective fire service has been truly remarkable. And one thing I've noticed, not to embarrass the publication or the company, but something that one publication that we are all familiar with, they had a definition, and I served on the committee for this review of this text, and they had a definition of a housewife in the text that was truly offensive. And so as I'm sitting there with my colleagues, and I'm saying, so how did this make it into this manual? And after several revisions, how come it hasn't been taken out? So just for me to be able to be at the table, to have that discussion, and then to have that offensive language stricken out of this very important manual to the fire service, that wouldn't have happened if I wasn't there. So to have those opportunities is truly, truly remarkable, and I don't take it for granted.
And I'm sure you're finding value bringing it back to the organization, and there's probably a lot that the city of Oakland's benefiting from, directly, indirectly, just bringing that knowledge back. So you said you're defending your PhD.
That's right.
What is your topic? What are we defending here?
So it's a descriptive phenomenological study. It is exploring servant leadership behaviors in career fire department officers. And right now, I've done all my interviews. So right now I'm doing the analysis and coding of the data. And all my buddies who I recommended or pushed for them to get their doctorates, they're all done. So now they're telling me, Reg, you're right there, man. Just keep pushing. You're right there. I'm like, yeah, easy for you to say, buddy. You're already done. But it's downhill from here, man. So hopefully within the next 60 days, I should defend, and I'll be officially Dr. Freeman.
You have to be so proud. That is a pinnacle. That is, if anybody knows, I worked next to, when I was a training lieutenant, the lieutenant next to me was going to get his PhD, and the hours, the tenacity, this is not just something that, you're a good dude, we'll give you your PhD, but.
And there were some big games this weekend, man. And, part of me, that little voice in my head said, it's okay. You can watch the games and then come back to doing the data analysis. And I said, nope, I'm not going to fall for that trick. So the entire weekend, literally, man, I spent probably at least 11, 12 hours sitting at my desk at the house on Saturday and Sunday, working on his PhD. But yeah, it's going to be well worth it at the end. And I'm so excited. And going back to my daughters, honestly, Michael, I quit mentally a few times in this process. To where I said, you know what, it's not worth it. I don't want it that bad. I'm done. And then I thought about my daughters, and I said, there's going to come a point in time where I'm going to have to tell them, don't quit, don't give up. So I don't want to be a hypocrite. And that's the reason why I'm finishing, is because of my daughters, because I thought about that instance to where I want to be able to say with integrity, Daddy didn't quit, so you're not going to quit either.
It's amazing what those little souls do to us big type A dads, isn't it? How
That's
they,
right.
yeah, God bless them.
Yeah.
All right. So what do you think is the big issue that's going to be affecting the fire service here that you see over the next 12 months? What's kind of one of those things that sometimes we say, hey, this is what keeps fire chiefs up, but what's really, you're working on staffing. I think you're working on employee development. What is that next issue?
I really think, Michael, it's going to be neck and neck between DEI and a fiscal reckoning. So, some cities have done okay through the pandemic, others have not. I know for Oakland, thank goodness, we have brought in a little bit more than we had projected, but we also had rolling brownouts back in 2020 as well. And if anything goes awry, that could be back on the table, and I'll have to be pushing back and figuratively fighting for my personnel and my department to where we're going to try to hold that off. But uh, coming to grips with our fiscal shortcomings as local government and really truly, we talk about DEI all the time, and I really believe that a lot of people truly don't even understand what diversity, equity, and inclusion really means. And there's going to continue to be issues, I think, because of that. And I think there's going to come a point to where there's DEI fatigue, to where people are just tired of hearing about it and they're going to start tuning it out. That's going to cause issues, because if people are tuning it out, not taking it seriously, then there's not going to be any progress or change. And it's one thing for a city like Oakland, who is diverse, to push for diversity. And this is what I mean by people not really understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oakland, because we are such a diverse city, the fire department should expect it to be diverse. Aspen, Colorado is not a diverse city. So what kind of diversity are you expecting in Aspen, Colorado? Just as an example. You see what I'm saying? So having realistic expectations, although there should be, of course, representation of women in any town USA fire department. I don't want to keep picking on Aspen. It's on my bucket list, by the way, to go to in the wintertime. But and there should be representation of any heritage or ethnic group that is represented in the city. But the equity and inclusion piece is the part in the fire service to where a lot of folks aren't spending enough time prioritizing, because the equity and inclusion piece is what truly makes members feel valued, is what truly makes people feel as if they have a stake within their organization. And that's the part that we're not getting right, is the equity and inclusion. And in some jurisdictions, the war between the administration and the local. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, the local and the administration both, should have the same priority, which is to take care of the firefighter. If we take care of the firefighter, everything else kind of works itself out. But the problem, that lies is sometimes you have pride and ego to get in the way of that kind of progression. So equity and inclusion amongst members of the department, equity and inclusion with labor, because labor should be at the table. Labor should have input, or at least have direct conversations or a direct avenue to the office of the chief for the betterment of the department. Those things we really have to work on in the fire service.
Who's probably taught me the most? It's my kids, because their culture, their world is a lot more accepting than anything we've grown up in. And I hate to say that they're even ahead of us in a lot of the gender related issues. Especially young females in high school, I see a whole bunch of this. And you bring up an interesting point on this fatigue, because we've had some key staff that are like, I don't understand. Well, let's just speak to some of the gender issues, and more and more organizations are having to have conversations and educate their leaders and try to find training and just make sure their policies are in line, because I think we all I think progressive leaders understand what the dynamics of their organization are supposed to be in acceptance, in how we support our humans. But I think some of our people come to us in a very pure place saying, I don't understand this. I understand what I'm supposed to be as a leader. How do we help them? And I think you bring up an interesting point on the fatigue. But we have all got a lot of work to do.
That's right. And one example I'll leave you with, Michael, is, so in Oakland, I do firehouse visits all the time, right? So my folks will have a hard time figuring out, what firehouse has occurred and I'm about to reference. So recently did a firehouse visit, and in the women's bathroom, someone had cut their hair and left the hair on the floor in the women's bathroom in the firehouse. Now, is that equitable? Absolutely not. Do our women members assigned to that house feel included? Absolutely not. And those are the kind of things to where we talk about DEI. That's an example of, if we truly believe what we're saying, that DEI is important, those kind of things, those kind of issues will be addressed. Now, is there any perfect fire department out there? Absolutely not. There's no perfect fire chief. There's no perfect firefighter. But when situations like that arise, that needs to be handled and needs to be addressed. That's diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Yeah, for sure. I think, Chief, you are a true leader. I thank you for taking time with us. If people want to connect with you outside of this, what's the best way for them to get with you?
Certainly feel free to shoot me an email, rfreeman, 2, at oaklandca.gov. Love to have a conversation.
Awesome. And we'll put the Chief's email and Twitter and LinkedIn in the bottom here in the notes. But thank you for all you're doing. Thank you for your continued leadership. I know I learned a whole bunch today. And hopefully I look forward to seeing you at FRI or some other conference in the near future once we all get back together. But anything else you want to leave people with or challenge them with today?
Control your own destiny. Just know that you should be doing things because you want to do it and not to prove anyone else wrong. And thank you for everything that you're doing for your respective community. And thank you for everything that you're doing for the fire service. And also thank you, Michael, for all that you do for our beloved profession. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Chief. Have a great day.
You too.